Changes are coming, but what type of changes can be made? That plus more on today's edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast for Tuesday, September 24th, 2024.
You are Locked On Raiders, your daily Las Vegas Raiders podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, Raider Nation, to another edition of the Locked On Raiders podcast. Thank you so much for making the show your first listen of the day. Make sure you subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast to get the latest edition of the show as soon as it becomes available. And as always, if you're checking us out on YouTube, you know we appreciate that. The show grows each and every day. That's because of your support and because of the job my man Ari does each and every day, making sure we're looking good and we're sounding good on YouTube. Thanks so much to Ari. You can check him out on Twitter at Ari Producers. You can hit me up as well at your boy Q254. And we got the Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line at 707-654-4693. And as you can imagine, plenty of your calls and texts. That's coming up in segment number 3 as much as possible. Plenty of feedback based off of what we saw on Sunday and what are the Raiders going to do moving forward. So we'll have that in segment number 3. Segment number 2, we'll talk about changes and what potential changes can the Raiders make. As Antonio Pierce has alluded to, changes need to be made. Obviously not very happy with the performance from his team on Sunday, and something has to change. And really, effort has to be the number one thing, right? The effort has got to be there. That was the biggest problem with the showing on Sunday. So we'll talk about changes, potential changes, segment number 2. Here in segment number 1, news and notes of the day, as we always do. We'll jump right into it after I tell you about the title sponsor of the show, which is FanDuel. Place your first $5 bet, and you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. All you got to do, visit FanDuel.com to get started. So off top, probably one of the biggest pieces of news for the Raiders on Monday was the fact that safety Marcus Epps is now out for the season with a torn ACL. He tore that ACL in the second half of the game on Sunday, and I knew when he was down, and a lot of us in the press box will never speculate on an injury when we don't know, but we'll wait for it to get confirmed. But just the way that he was laying on the grass and the way that he would grab his knee immediately and got up and he, to his credit, walked to the locker room himself, limped to the locker room. You knew it wasn't very good. AP was asked after the game, and all he could say it was a knee injury, did not know. Matter of fact, when we talked to AP on Monday afternoon around 12:15 Pacific time, he wasn't 100% sure at that time either, and then it came out a little bit later that Marcus Epps is going to be out for the season. So another big blow to the Raiders defense that all of a sudden is getting hit with depth in a major way, right? Their depth is taking a massive hit, and they're already a team that don't have a lot of depth to begin with, but they have guys that, the first string and the first team are really good, and some of the second team is really good, but that's really about it. So now you have Marcus Epps out for the season. You've got Malcolm Kuntz. We found out that late on Friday that he's going to be out for the season. He was supposed to be the Robin to Max Crosby's Batman. Max Crosby himself is dealing with a high ankle sprain, so he's obviously not at the top of his game right now. He's still going to give you as much effort as possible, but he's still not where he needs to be. So tough times, and that's really tough for a defense that is supposed to be the leader of the team to have another guy, especially a guy like Marcus Epps, who's really not going to show up in the stat sheet a whole lot. He doesn't have, the numbers that just pop off the page, but Patrick Graham, the defensive coordinator, credits him so much for communication, for being able to line up the guys and have them in the right position. So now you got a guy like Isaiah Palomar who goes in there and probably takes – he's the backup to Trayvon Merrick. You got Chris Smith, the second-year guy, who's the backup to Marcus Epps. So they'll make some kind of decisions on how they're going to fill that void, but that's tough. Marcus Epps is also on the last year of his deal, so there's a chance that he may have played his last snap with the Raiders. Same with Malcolm Kuntz. He's on the last year of his deal as well. Not saying that those guys aren't going to get re-signed, but we don't know that they're going to get re-signed until they do. Those guys were not guys selected by GM Tom Telesco. So definitely something to pay attention to, but the Raiders in their depth took a big hit on Monday with Marcus Epps now being out for the season. Matter of fact, Trey Taylor, he's on IR, so he'll be eligible to come back after the 4th game, so this upcoming week against Cleveland. So again, there's a lot of injuries going on, not only with the Raiders but across the league, but obviously the Raiders are what are important to us here on the Locked On Raiders podcast, and they've got a bunch of guys that are banged up. So Antonio Pierce met with us on Monday, and he was supposed to meet with us around 11 o'clock in the morning. We got a notification from Raiders PR that it was actually going to be pushed back to about 12:15. What happened is there was meetings that lasted very long with the coaching staff. Apparently, AP was not too happy with them, and so he let the coaching staff know about it. So they had multiple meetings, and then the players also had a very lengthy players-only meeting. So we haven't got the full details of what happened in that players-only meeting, but you can only imagine coming off an embarrassing loss like that at home, 36-22, and really it wasn't even that close to the Carolina Panthers, that there was some soul-searching going on in that players-only meeting, which is a good thing, right? Hopefully it gets them fired up and gets them ready to go because they got a tough Cleveland team coming into town this upcoming week. But AP did meet with us around 12:15, followed by Christian Wilkins. And just here's a couple minutes of what Antonio Pierce had to say. One, on the statement that he made about business decisions and, if there was any business decisions that have been made by the team yet, and then also potential changes.
No, we haven't. Got to give it to the players first.
Obviously, a lot was made of that comment, national media-wise this morning. I guess if you think about it, are you happy that you pointed it out? And
I don't bite my tongue. I don't bite my tongue.
When it comes to making business decisions on the coaching staff's part, is that something where it's lineup changes? Is it potentially guys?
Just whatever helps the Raiders win. And right now, that performance is not going to help any team win, let alone the Raiders.
Antonio, over the last 4 games last year, Zamir ran. He led the NFL in rushing and rushing yards per carry. Yeah. I know that there was a scheme change. There was an offensive, coaching change. Do you feel like maybe it needs to get back to what you were doing last year? Because there was success last year.
No, it was. We did. And last year's last year. We are where we are now, worst running teams in football. And that's not something I'm proud of. Our staff is not proud of it. I'm sure our team is not. And again, we're going to get in here and we're going to chip away after we make the corrections from today and be honest with one another. But it's very disappointing to watch our run game.
Do you feel like there's some scheme changes that can?
I think there's going to be a lot of changes.
That including personnel?
Like I always say, everything. We just need to be successful, man. Right now, I think yesterday we had a run of 6 and a run of 9. Everything else was 2 and 3. You're not going to win a National Football League like that.
You said you haven't spoken to the players yet, but how do you expect them to react to the business decisions comment from you yesterday?
It's football, right? After a loss like that, things need to change.
What did you see from Aiden in his limited spot duty there? I know you talked yesterday about just giving him a shot to see what he can do, but is there any chance whatsoever that gives you pause going forward?
Well, I just think, you look at how the game went. We're down by 2 scores or so. Let Aiden come in, see what he can do with the offense, move it. We're just trying to look for a spark.
Could that mean anything going forward? Or is it still Gardner still the guy?
I think we got to give it to players and just evaluate everything from yesterday first.
One of the biggest themes of what Antonio Pierce had to say in his presser was probably about 10 to 12 minutes on Monday was that they were going over film. They were talking about changes. They were trying to get things corrected, but he was going to speak with the team before he made any big changes. So, you heard Paul Gutierrez at the end there asking about the quarterback situation because we did see Aiden O'Connell get thrown into the mix at the end of the game. And, when you have a situation where it's not a bona fide starter, like a long-term guy, like Derek Carr was a 9-year guy, if you pull him at the end of a game and put the backup in, well, that's just trying to get him out of there in garbage time, making sure your starting quarterback doesn't get banged up. But when you have a situation where Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell both battled it out for the starting quarterback job, and Gardner Minshew won it really kind of by default as far as I'm concerned. Neither one of those guys shined in training camp or preseason. I was actually surprised, as many of us were. Thought Aiden O'Connell was actually going to win the job. So you heard, Paul ask about, is it still Gardner Minshew's team? And AP didn't commit to anybody. He said, hey, we need to talk to the team first. Well, later on in the day, Ian Rappaport, Rap Sheet from NFL Network, he tweeted out the Raiders are sticking with quarterback Gardner Minshew, sources say, so no Aiden O'Connell just yet. So that's the biggest key right there. No Aiden O'Connell just yet. And I mentioned Paul Gutierrez, me and him both talked with Aiden O'Connell in the Raiders locker room following the game on Sunday, and, talked to him on the record and even talked to him off the record and asked him about that situation. Asked him about the situation of being thrown into the game late, especially when it's a little bit different than, your normal backup coming in mop-up duty time. And he said, yeah, it is a little different, right? Just because of the situation. But that wasn't something that we had on the record. That was just kind of a side conversation we had with them after we were done recording. So again, Rap Sheet says no change at quarterback just yet, but that doesn't mean that one's not being considered and not one's going to be had sooner rather than later. So that's what I got for you for segment number 1 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast, little news and notes around the team. So what realistic changes can be made? The pretty much of the roster that the team has. So how do they put it together? How do they, come back and have a much better showing than they did on Sunday versus the Carolina Panthers? We'll talk about that coming up in segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Before we get into that, though, I do want to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. When you're hiring for your small business, you want to find quality professionals that are right for the role. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you can't find anywhere else, even those who aren't actively searching for a new job, but might be open to the perfect role. In a given month, over 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not looking on LinkedIn, you're looking in the wrong place. On LinkedIn, 86% of small businesses get qualified candidates within 24 hours. They hire professionals like a professional on LinkedIn. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. They even just launched a feature that helps you write job descriptions, making the process even easier and even quicker. Right now, post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Raider Nation, here we go. Segment number 2 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Want to talk about some realistic changes that Antonio Pierce could make to try to put this team in a better position to win games. And the thing about it is, it's only week 3, right? They've only played 3 games. They still have 14 more guaranteed. So the season is far from over, right? It's not like, oh, the sky is falling and it's over, done deal. Start talking about the draft. I mean, currently, as wild as it sounds, they're in the number 7 spot in the playoffs, right? They would actually be a playoff team if the season ended today. Now, obviously, it doesn't, but I mean, that's just kind of how the season has gone right now. If you look across the league, I mean, hell, look at Monday Night Football. The Bengals 0-3 on the season. They're a team that everyone thought was going to compete with the Kansas City Chiefs. There's other teams that aren't living up to, what they were supposed to be doing. I mean, just look on, look in the NFC. Look at the 49ers. They're 1-2 on the season. Of course, they're riddled with injuries, but I mean, that's just how it goes. There's a lot of teams that are really struggling. There's a lot of 1-2 teams right now, including the Raiders. So, I mean, it's not like it's over and they can't rebound from it. Again, my biggest issue, and I'm sure what Antonio Pierce's biggest issue is what you saw on that field on Sunday was just a lack of effort. The lackluster, just what they did. It's just, again, to me, my biggest thing was it felt like they showed up to Allegiant and thought they were just going to get a W. Like, oh, that's just what's, we've earned this already. We've already earned the win without taking the field. And that's something I never thought would be the problem under Antonio Pierce. We've seen it before, but never thought that was going to be the case under AP. And I think that that's the biggest, shock to him as well, because that's not something that, he would expect from a team that's, that he is the leader of. And he knows the mental makeup of these guys and realizes nothing is given in the NFL, but it just seems like they showed up thinking that they were going to be given a W because, well, everyone said Carolina is a really bad team. So he's talked about a lot of changes need to be made, and there's only so much you could do, right? I mean, you're not going to all of a sudden bench half the team, right? I mean, there's people say, oh, well, Devontae didn't do this, or Devon. Okay, well, there's certain guys that aren't going to be, sat down or benched. I mean, it's not a college roster where you have just a plethora of talent. You've got another 5-star recruit sitting behind the first 5-star recruit. That's not the case. You got a 53-man roster, and we all know the first team is much better than the second team. It's just that simple. So, there's not a running back that all of a sudden the Raiders can go out and sign that's going to be some stud running back. There's not a quarterback that they can go find that's all of a sudden going to be, the second coming of Rich Gannon or whatever. I mean, it's not that. We know what the Raiders have to work with. So how do they make changes to work within what they have? That's the bigger question, and that's what the conversation should be about. So off top, one of the biggest options and things that I think that they could do, and they're probably exploring, is putting Luke Getsy upstairs. I know I saw a lot of people say you got to fire Luke Getsy, get him out of here. He's not a very good offensive coordinator. But where do you want to go? He's the OC right now. So while he's the OC, similar to what Patrick Graham was when he was the defensive coordinator on the sideline and it wasn't working too well. So he went upstairs to the booth and it worked out a lot better. Maybe that's a realistic move that the Raiders could make with offensive coordinator Luke Getsy. Put him in the booth. Maybe he gets a better view of the field and everything, how it unfolds, and can call a cleaner game and set the team up for success. Because, look, I don't think it's a Gardner Minshew thing. I don't think it's an Aiden O'Connell thing. I think it was a team thing, right? And offensively and defensively, unfortunately, the defense has always been the strength of the team, or we knew it was going to be the strength of the team. And even on Sunday, the defense was lackluster. But one of the moves that you can make for the offense is putting the offensive coordinator upstairs in the booth. Put Luke Getsy upstairs. Also, you got to get the run game going. We know this. It's not very good, right? I mean, now they're averaging, three yards a carry? That's not very good, right? I think they had, 16, 17 carries on the day, and a couple of those were Gardner Minshew scrambling, trying to get out of harm's way. So maybe they need to make some adjustments along the offensive line and with their play calls as far as the running game goes itself. Like, you have Zamir White. If the zone's running scheme is not, outside zone is not his thing, don't try to make him do it, right? One of the things that we talked about quite a bit in the offseason leading up to training camp and the preseason is that these coaches, rather their players be doing what they do really well instead of trying to fit into their scheme, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest things that we said. That was the difference between Josh McDaniels-led team and a Antonio Pierce-led team. They see players and say, okay, let's let them do what they do really well. Let's not be stuck so much on our scheme. So maybe if Zamir White's not going to excel in this outside zone read, he's just not, patient enough to let the hole develop, maybe you need to go back to the power run, right? The power running scheme and the power blocking scheme with the offensive line, because that needs to come together as well. So, you have to be flexible, right? I'm going back to Luke Getsy. Not only did I put him in the booth, but he's got to be more flexible, right? Go to these players and find out what they do really well. That's the one thing that we knew about this Raiders offense, that it was going to struggle early on, especially. So what do they do really well? What can they figure out that they do really well and just do it over and over and over again? They haven't found what they do really well yet. I mean, we talked about them spreading the ball around and getting it to the playmakers like Devontae and Brock Bowers. Brock Bowers was getting doubled all day on Sunday. And even Devontae couldn't get involved. And when he did get involved, there's a couple he put on the ground. So, I mean, and that's on him. He as the leader of the team, as the big-time playmaker, the stud wide receiver that he is, he's got to be better than that. He's got to be engaged and be locked in the game at all times. But, that's realistic that they can, change up a little bit of the running and how they're trying to get the running game going, because without it, again, the offense is going to be one-dimensional and it's never going to work. Obviously, the quarterback change could always be made, but as we found out from Ian Rappaport, that the Raiders aren't changing the quarterback as of right now. Now, maybe they get through this game with Cleveland and say, yeah, it's still not working. All right, before we go to Denver, let's make this move. I don't know, right? I mean, again, you have Gardner Minshew and you have Aiden O'Connell. One of the two things that I've been pretty consistent with all offseason, training camp, preseason is that there's a good chance both these quarterbacks are going to play. I still believe that. I believe that the day that Gardner Minshew was announced as a starting quarterback, I was actually surprised that Gardner Minshew was named the starting quarterback. But the one thing that Antonio Pierce kept saying is that he needed him to help him get off to a good start, a good quick start, so they're not trying to climb themselves out of a hole. And they haven't got too deep into a hole yet. They're 1-2, but all of a sudden you drop to 1-3, and then maybe go to Denver and drop to 1-4. All of a sudden you're looking up saying, oh, what happened? Where's the season going? And you got to figure out how to get better. Just like look at Jacksonville, who lost on Monday night as well. They're 0-3 on the season. They just paid their quarterback $200-something million. He's part of the $50 million plus a year club. And well, he hasn't won a game yet this season. So there's a lot of questions going on around the league. What we focus on, obviously, is the Raiders. But the quarterback change, that's not happening as of right now. Keep that in your back pocket, because that's something realistic that could happen. Defensively, especially now that they're starting to lose some bodies, one, they got to figure out how to stop the run. Now we've discovered, right, for sure, what everyone already kind of expected and suspected, but wasn't 100% sure if it was, a realistic problem. But stopping the run, it's got to happen. They've got to find a way to stop the run. Christian Wilkins was paid a lot of money. Obviously, he's a guy that can get to the quarterback, but he can stop the run as well. Adam Butler's a little bit thin, So, he's good at coming in on third down and trying to get pressure on the quarterback. That's good. But it seems like when Wilkins and Jenkins aren't in there together, then they're getting gashed right up the gut with the, in the run game. They got to figure out a way to stop that. Maybe moving Tyree Wilson inside. And the reason I say throw him inside, I'm not saying he's going to dominate inside, but he's got to find somewhere where he could be effective. And I don't know where he's going to be effective. He had a couple rushes on Sunday against Carolina where he almost got home, but that sounds like Arden Key. Remember when Arden Key was the king of the almost sack, right? You don't want Tyree Wilson to be the almost sack guy or the almost got home guy, almost got a good pressure, almost made the play. You don't want to be the king of almost. You want to be the guy that makes the play. So maybe moving him inside is better. Maybe he has an opportunity to get off. Maybe he can help stop the run. I mean, again, I'm not saying that that's the answer, but you got to find something that he does really well. You've got to get production out of your former number 7 overall pick. There's just no two ways about it. I mentioned earlier Isaiah Palmau. He's a guy on the depth chart that's sitting behind Trayvon Merrick. I wouldn't be surprised if he's sitting in front of Trayvon Merrick this upcoming week. So far in the season, through 3 games, Trayvon Merrick has missed a bunch of tackles. And there was, when talking about business decisions that Antonio Pierce was mentioning, going back and looking at some of the game from Sunday, there was a couple plays where you saw Trayvon not really hustling that much. And I'm actually surprised that that's the case. It's a contract year for him. Normally, guys in contract years really ball out because they're in contract years. And, for him to not be having that production that I expected him to have in a contract year is a surprise. Isaiah Palmau just happens to be a guy that's always around the ball. He almost came up with an interception on Sunday. Right. I mean, he just somehow, some way, he's always around the ball. I wouldn't be, against giving him an opportunity to get the start and have Trayvon Merrick sitting on the sideline watching. Right. Marcus Epps is going to get replaced, I think, by Chris Smith, who's, again, the former 6th-round pick out of Georgia, who's been sitting behind Marcus Epps. And now that Epps is out for the season with the torn ACL, this might give Chris Smith the opportunity. As I mentioned, rookie Trey Taylor out of Air Force, he's on the IR, so he won't come back till at least after this game coming up this week with the Cleveland Browns. So that's another option that they can make defensively. Jack Jones, I don't think that they would sit him. They just don't have depth at the cornerback position. But there was a couple plays that he made on Sunday that looked like the 100% effort wasn't there. I know that he got a little bit banged up. His hand got crunched a little bit, but that's, you can't have that. You got to have that guy that's going to give the maximum effort at all times. There's a reason why Marcus Peters was cut by AP because he wasn't given the effort. Jack Jones, has never been a question about his effort and his energy. But there was a couple plays on Sunday that looked like, he was, not really hustling 100%. And again, I don't think that they're in any position to sit him because they don't have the depth. Jacorian Bennett's playing well, in my opinion. He's doing a really good job. I like what I see from JB. Is he going to be perfect? No, he's going to have a couple mistakes here and there, but I can live with those mistakes because he's out there playing his tail off. Nate is playing his tail off as well. I don't think Jack's going to get sat down, but he could be on notice like, hey, dude, like you've got to clean this up. You've got to make sure that you're giving us everything you got all the time when you're out there. The one thing Marvin Lewis said about him and AP said about him and Rob Ryan has said about him and anybody in the defensive side of things, Ricky Manning, the secondary coach, has said about him, you just need to get consistency from Jack Jones. If you can get consistency and get him playing at the top of his game, he's a really good corner. You just got to keep him in good spirits, and you got to keep him up. When he's up, he's really, really good. When he's not, well, then he's not. Then he struggles. So that's the job of the coaching staff and also Jack Jones to make sure that, he's got his mind right and he's ready to go. I say it all the time. There's only 3 things in this world you can control: your effort, your attitude, and your availability. That's it. Everything else, especially when you're out there playing sports, you're playing football, things are going to happen. You're going to give up a play, right? You're going to get beat. Sometimes the team's going to be better, right? The Raiders might have gone out there on Sunday with maximum effort and still lost to Carolina. They might have just been the better team that day. That happens. I can live with a loss like that. Of course, you don't like it. I can live with a loss when I see that they're out there giving everything they got. They're giving the Max Crosby effort, which is all the effort in the world. He's hobbled right now. He's got the high ankle sprain, so he's not 100%. He's not going to be able to go 100%. And if the Raiders defense can't step up and play when Max Crosby's not at his very best, then it's going to be a very long season. They've got to find a way to be good even when Max might not be 100% of himself because he's just not. That high ankle sprain, that's not going away anytime soon. So those are some of the options that I think are realistic. Let me know what you think are realistic options for this Raiders team. Again, the roster. You know the coaches. You know what they can do at this stage of the game and what they can't do. Don't tell me Unique Ngakoue is the answer either, because he just decided to re-sign with the Baltimore Ravens, so he's off the market. He's not even available. So I'll save you that. I'll save you that name that you throw my way, because I've heard that for a while. Unique Ngakoue is no longer available as he decided to return to the Baltimore Ravens. They made that announcement on Monday. But let me know your thoughts. 707-654-4693. Your calls and texts are coming up in segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. NFL fans, you can get into the season with a big return on FanDuel. Just finished with 3 weeks of the season, so heading into week 4, you could definitely jump on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. When you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Matter of fact, if you're watching that Bills-Jaguars game, the Bills just destroyed Jacksonville, 47-10. But in the middle of the game, all of a sudden, Josh Allen went from being, second or third as far as the potential MVP of the league to first. He went ahead of Patrick Mahomes to the favorite to be the league MVP after the performance he put on Jacksonville. He had 4 touchdown passes in the first half of that game, and they beat the brakes off Jacksonville. So if you get that hunch in the middle of the game or you're seeing a performance like that, you could always go to FanDuel and make it happen. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. That's FanDuel.com. Check it out today. Here we go, Raider Nation. Segment number 3 of today's Locked On Raiders podcast. Your calls and texts straight off that Locked On Raider podcast voicemail line. You know the number, 707-654-4693. Let's start things off with a text today from Aldo. Aldo from Sonora, Mexico. He says, "Hey, Q, it's Aldo from Sonora, Mexico. Big fan of the show. First listen of the day, always. Thank you for everything you do for Raider Nation each and every day and for always keeping it 100. Still reeling from the embarrassing, disgusting loss to the Panthers. Throughout the years, I've watched the Raiders drop some humiliating performances like the Jets in 2019, Falcons in 2020, Mayfield and the Rams, Jeff Saturday and the Colts, Saints midfield game, to name a few. But as a longtime fan, this loss definitely stacks up amongst the worst of them. It's disconcerting to witness so many personnel changes and roster changes and coaches changes and still see the same inconsistent roller coaster type of play from our team. It definitely doesn't get any easier, but as a fan, you just come to expect it. Still holding hope for the season and for the future, though. I do think we have the right pieces in place to remain a threat for anyone matching up against us week in and week out. Just hope the front office continues to build and scheme around our current weapons and star players. Personally, I'm looking at Quinn Ewers for next year's draft. If quarterback is the way the team decides to go come April, if not, it would make sense to play out Minshew's contract and maybe go after Arch Manning come 2026 if he does choose to declare for that draft. Either way, I hope Telesco plays it aggressively and goes out of his way to get us a true franchise quarterback for the future, even if it means picking up the phone and conjuring up some deals instead of waiting for the best player available at our draft position. Anyway, still a long way to go for that. Hope the team rights the ship sooner rather than later for the nation's sake, if not for their own. Again, thank you, Q, for the unwavering effort and energy you bring to the show and all things Raiders, and for all the awesome content. Peace. That's a text, long text from Aldo from Sonora, Mexico. Excuse me. Thank you so much for that text. I appreciate you. And yeah, man, the franchise quarterback's got to be a must. That's got to be priority number 1, 2, and 3 in the offseason. It really has to be, right? And they've got to find a way to get that. And if they're going to be able to get it this year, fantastic. If not, well, then, it might be another tough year. And so that's why I think that, Minshew and O'Connell will both play this year, and maybe O'Connell will have an opportunity to grow. The only thing is, what I know from what I saw in training camp is that neither one of the guys really grabbed this Luke Getsy offense and ran with it. And then it hurts even worse when you're watching Monday Night Football and you see what Washington was able to do, get the victory over the Bengals 38-33, I should say, on Monday Night Football. And Jaden Daniels, the guy that we talked about all offseason, the guy I talked about all offseason, just was out there dealing. My man had 2 incompletions on the night. 2 incompletions. He was accounted for 3 touchdowns, 2 passing, and 1 running. He was fantastic, right? And the Commanders are sitting there at 2-1. And what makes matters worse, not only did Jaden Daniels do that, but their offensive coordinator was Cliff Kingsbury. And Cliff Kingsbury was the guy that the Raiders wanted to hire originally as their OC, and ended up with Luke Getsy when Cliff Kingsbury backed out. So could you imagine if, and I hate to, look at what the next team's got, right? I know we ain't supposed to do that. Sit there and look at what the next team's got. It's like, man, that sure would be nice to be, be Raiders. But Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden Daniels would have been an awesome 1-2 punch. But reality is Washington wasn't going to come up off that number 2 spot. There was no way they were going to let the Raiders get up there to number 2. They were going to get their guy and probably got the best quarterback in the draft. And I know it's only been 3 games, but he's played a lot better than Caleb Williams has, right? And he was my favorite the whole time. He was the guy that I was hoping the Raiders were going to find a way to wheel and deal and get him, and it just wasn't going to happen. And I know he wanted to be a Raider as well, but like he told me at the draft, they would have to do a whole lot. They'd have to move some mountains to be able to get in position to go get him, and it just didn't happen. So now that's what the Raiders' job is. That's what Tom Telesco's job is to do, is go and find the franchise quarterback. Now, the issues from Sunday were not just quarterback related. It was whole team related. Coaches, players, everybody. It was the whole thing. The only person or the only folks that were not responsible for that loss on Sunday is Raider Nation. Raider Nation did their part and then some. Raider Nation was fantastic, phenomenal even. Serious. Raider Nation was awesome at Allegiant Stadium. Only problem is the Raiders weren't awesome at Allegiant Stadium. That is the problem. But thanks for the text, man. It's great to hear from you. Appreciate you tuning into the show. Got a call from Luke in Connecticut. He's calling to talk about the same old Raiders, a title that they have earned. Here's Luke in Connecticut.
Hey, Q. This is Luke from Connecticut. I haven't called into the show in a few years, and I felt that it was time to break the streak. I just want to lead off the chat with there cannot be an offensive lineman on the free agency that just simply is not better than what the Raiders currently have. The right side of the line is putrid, and that's putting it lightly. It's historically bad. Cody Whitehair is exactly who we thought he'd be, so I can't be mad at it. Colton Miller obviously is 100%. I think Andre James is ghastly overrated, but that's just the start. It's the same old Raiders. It's the same old Raiders that simply cannot beat a team they should beat. They play down to their competition every single year, and I feel like we're having this conversation for the past 20 or so years. They'll beat a team that is much better than them and follow it up with something like this. And I just don't know what the problem is. It can't be the same problem for the past 20 years. The Raiders have to be cursed or something. And I never expected this under Antonio Pierce. I didn't expect him to be a winning coach this year. I really did not. I thought they would battle for a playoff spot, and they still could. But I can't get excited for this team in the long run if things like this keep happening. I can't even blame Gardner Minshew. He was all that was left in the offseason. And the Raiders paid him thinking they could have their best shot under him. I can't be mad at that. But he doesn't even have time to throw. Am I supposed to think Aiden O'Connell, who's a statue in the pocket, is going to fare any better? But the thing is for me, and I'm going on a rant, I feel like a bouncy ball in a small room just going from point to point. The thing for me was the defense. What happened? There is no reason the defense should be playing like that. And that is the most concerning thing in this whole game. I have many more things to say, but you guys don't want to listen to me the entire segment, Q. So, Luke from Connecticut out.
Thanks for the call. Appreciate you. And, yeah, man, I'm really surprised that they showed up the way that they did with the lack of energy. You know, like it's like they showed up thinking that they're, one of the best teams in the league and they're about to play the worst team in the league and they were just going to, choke them out real quick. Like they didn't have to take them seriously. It was really a disappointing effort. Again, I can understand losses. Losses are going to happen. But when you don't have that effort, that attention to detail, like that's not there, that's when there's a problem. And every player that I talked to in the locker room, believe me, talked to about 10 or 11 players, for the most part, all of them, I asked, like, are you surprised about the lack of energy, the no juice? What happened? Right? It was just bad. So yeah, I think your call's spot on. Thanks so much for it. I do appreciate you. Up next, got a text from Mike in Buffalo. It says, hey Q, Mike from Buffalo here. Big letdown this weekend. My wife is a Panthers fan, and before the game, she said, you're going to kill us. To which I responded, I hope so, but no guarantee. For the first time in our 11 years of marriage, she said, wow, you were right. Anyway, Raiders need to reevaluate their blocking scheme. Zeus went off last year when he took over for Jacobs. Go back to that blocking scheme and those plays that work for him. 3 out of 5 linemen are here from last year. In my opinion, it's a scheme. Still hopeful here, but not as optimistic as I was coming out of camp. Go Raiders. That's Mike in Buffalo, and that goes back to what I was talking about in segment number 2. Realistic changes that could be made. I know Vinny Bonsignore asked, Coach Pierce about the run blocking scheme and how it worked last year, and you heard him in segment number 1 say, yeah, that was last year. Everything's on the table, right? So I don't think that he's opposed to it. I just know that James Craig is the offensive line coach. He coaches the zone blocking scheme as far as the offensive line goes, and the running game, the way that Luke Getsy wants to run it. He wants to run that outside zone. I don't know how flexible they're going to be with that, but I'm with you. I would have no problem if they just said, yeah, this ain't working. And for some reason, as much as and effective as that running scheme is, for some reason, every time the Raiders try to run it, it just doesn't work, right? Remember when Dennis Allen took over, and he was obviously he's a defensive-minded head coach, but when he took over as the head coach back, Derek Carr's rookie year, 2014, he tried to run that scheme because he said as a defensive coordinator, it was always so difficult to defend that, right? To stop that run. So he wanted to do that. It never worked out, right? It just never every time. And I think the Raiders have tried to do that 2 or 3 times, and it just hasn't worked for them. I don't know why, but that's just kind of how it is. But thanks for the text. I do appreciate you. Let's get a call from Mark in Chicago. He's calling to talk about a potential quarterback change. Here he is, Mark in Chicago.
Hey, Q. Mark calling from Chicago. Wanted to get your perspective on the quarterback position for the Raiders. Antonio Pierce said today that there's a possibility, or he's considering the possibility of a quarterback change. All along, I believe Aiden O'Connell should be our starter. I was surprised when Gardner Minshew was named our starter. Wondering what your opinion is there on who's going to give us the best opportunity to win. I guess I'm just a bit confused when you look at the weapons we do have on the offensive side of the ball. We should have a stronger offensive line than we've had. Personally, I believe Aiden's sitting there with a stronger arm, a bigger, more, I wouldn't say athletic, but a bigger quarterback that I believe can see the field better. At times I've noticed Gardner has happy feet and he's throwing off balance. Personally, I just believe that Aiden gives us a better chance to win with a stronger arm and the weapons that we have in the passing game between Jacoby, Devontae, Brock Bowers. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but would really like your opinion on this one. Thank you. Go Raiders.
Mark, thanks so much for the call. And yeah, I mean, I'm not sure what the right answer, man. If you go to O'Connell, which clearly they're not going to go right away, as we found out earlier on Monday afternoon from Ian Rappaport, he said that they're not going to make a change as of yet. That doesn't mean that they won't, right? I mean, they might take a couple more L's and then say, all right, we got to do something. We got to make some kind of change. Look, I talked about it even in the Baltimore game. I thought at halftime when the Raiders only had 43 yards of offense, maybe they needed a spark because that was a winnable game. They were only down 9-6. So they were within striking range. I thought maybe they needed that spark. Antonio Pierce put in, Aiden O'Connell on Sunday against the Panthers because he was looking for that spark. So I wouldn't be surprised if in the next week or so you'll see Aiden O'Connell in the mix if things don't drastically improve. But I don't know how much that changes the game, right? We won't know until we see it. Both quarterbacks are capable of winning games in the National Football League. I do know that, but neither one of them are elite. They're just not. I had a guy give me like an 8-minute lecture on my radio show on Monday about Aiden O'Connell and him being on the bench and went back and forth, and it was ridiculous. And hey, I never said that the guy was not a good quarterback and he didn't do some good things at the end of last year. He's actually the guy that I thought was going to get the job coming out of camp. All I said is that he's not elite. And if you're trying to compete with that dude in the division named Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, even though he seems to never be kind of where he's, supposed to be, seems like something always happens with the Chargers. And, who knows if Bo Nix is really going to be the guy or not in Denver. He's their guy. They believe that that's their guy. You got to get a guy that you believe can compete with those dudes, right? And I don't think that realistically you look at Minshew or O'Connell and say, yeah, there's no doubt about it that that's going to be the guy to lead me to the promised land. I feel like quarterback has to be a priority in the offseason, regardless of what happens with this season. But thanks so much for that call. I do appreciate you. And we'll get one more quick text in. This one's from Robbie in Palmdale, California. It says, hey, Q, it's Robbie from Palmdale. My thoughts are this. Yes, that loss to the Panthers shouldn't have happened. But didn't we talk about the first 4 games of the Raiders walking away 3-1 or 2-2? It's a win. So let's say they win versus the Browns. Is it still okay? Since it was talked about, we'd be happy if Raiders went 2-2 in the first 4 games. Yeah, it may not have come against or who we thought was going to be a win versus the Chargers and the Panthers, but it's still 2-2. Just a random thought. Would people still feel it's a good start going 2-2 with the win versus the Ravens and the Browns? Also, isn't it better to lose versus NFC anyways if they lose? That's Robbie in Palmdale, California. Yeah, no, you're right. And I said 2-2 is fine, but at some point, if your goal is to make the playoffs in a quarter of the season, you've got to go 3-1. There's a certain time, maybe even twice, you've got to go 3-1. You can't consistently go 2-2. And no, I mean, yeah, you rather win the AFC conference games. Those are the ones that matter the most because you are going to be trying to jockey for a place in the playoffs. But again, I don't mind losses, right? So it's not really the loss that gets me upset about what happened on Sunday. It's the style. It's the way that they lost. It's the fact that the effort wasn't there. Yeah, they win and beat the Baltimore Ravens, and that was great, and they were flying high. And how do you build off that? Like AP said, how do we deal with success? Well, what we saw on Sunday was they didn't deal with success well. That's what bothers me. And if you can't deal with success early in the season well, how are you going to deal with success late in the season well? Are you going to be able to handle it? That's the question. So it's not really necessarily that they lost because it's only 3 games. They still have 14 more. You know, they can go on a run. I mean, they can do really well. But being able to get a big win on the road that nobody thought you were going to get, you wanted all the respect. You pounded your chest. You said you were keeping receipts. That's fine. But then you go and lay an egg and not show up. That defense was like it was like the Panthers were a hot knife, and the Raiders defense was butter. They just sliced right through them. That was the problem. That was what made me upset about what we saw on Sunday. Not to mention, that was a season home opener. Raider Nation was there loud and proud, and they didn't get rewarded for their efforts. That's what makes me mad as well. Raider Nation needs to start getting rewarded for their efforts and their attitude that they bring each and every game, whether it's on the road, just like AP said, man, it was loud in Baltimore. That's right, because Raider Nation was there. It was loud in Allegiant. You know why? Raider Nation was there, and they didn't get rewarded. That's what the bigger problem is. It's not really necessarily 3-1 and 2-2. Yeah, that matters, but it's the effort or lack of effort that the Raiders showed that made me upset, and I'm sure upset a lot of Raider Nation. I know that's what upset Antonio Pierce as well. That's why he started talking about business decisions. So obviously got a lot more to unpack from this. Coming up tomorrow, we'll get an opportunity to catch up with Antonio Pierce again as they start to turn the page and start to look forward to the Cleveland Browns. We'll start to do the same thing as well. Maybe we'll hear about some of the changes that have been made. Maybe not guaranteed, but we'll continue to monitor that, bring you all the news and notes as possible. We'll have plenty of discussion as well. As again, it's early in the season, the sky is not falling. You just got to have a lot more effort than they had on Sunday, and plus we'll get your calls and texts coming up on tomorrow's show as well. So until then, Raider Nation, take care of yourself, take care of your family, love on your family. Most importantly, as always, just win, baby.